I'm Mark Powell of Esoteric Recordings, and you're watching Cherry Red TV. And I'm pleased to say with me today is Peter Hammill, eminent solo musician and also member of Graaf Generator. Peter, it's nice to have you here.
Pleasure to be here.
Peter, one of the reasons you're here is the fact that Graaf Generator have recorded a new studio album, Grounding in Numbers, and it's out on March the 14th. And I was just wondering if you could give me some sort of insight into how that album came about and why it was time for another Graaf Generator album.
Well, particularly since we became a trio, obviously we had our reformation in 2004, 2005, and since then we've been a trio. And we've been keen to press on and have new material. We made the first new album, Trisector, a couple of years ago, and obviously the time came for us to push on even further. So back last year we began assembling material and then eventually went into the studio and ended up with what is A Grounding in Numbers.
When listening to the album, without using the sort of dreaded word concept, but there is, to the listener, some sort of concept going on there.
There's certainly our intention, I think, from the outset was to have something that was a through listen. I mean, unusually for us, the individual pieces are really quite short. There are a number of pieces that are only a couple of minutes, 3 minutes long. But we really wanted to have something that went to a number of different places absolutely consecutively. So there's hardly a pause for breath from the moment that it starts to the moment it finishes. So it would be a stretch to make it a concept, I think, but there are kind of loose thematic things that fit together, yeah.
So was it a conscious decision to actually go for that shorter approach to the songs?
Well, that was actually the material that we have. We're open to ideas. We don't have any kind of fixed dogma that we work on, and obviously when we went in to do the recording, there were these ideas and also a number of other ones, and it seemed happy for us to leave them as just 2-minute pieces. And, for some people that might appear a strange idea, because traditionally Van Graaf were known as being at least 10 minutes long, if not 15 or 20 or what have you. And that apparently would have been the banner that we waved. But even at that point, they were that long because they needed that long to make those statements. At this particular time, we've got things that are incredibly dense, that maybe even could have been wheedled out to a much longer length than they are, but actually what we're interested in it seems, and I'm saying this as an observer as much as a participant, it seems what we're interested in is doing this, like, let's go there, let's do that, done that, let's go on to the next thing. So it's simply what appeared in front of us.
So describe the writing process of something like that when you get together to do a Van der Graaf album. Is it people going into a rehearsal room or a studio with definite ideas, or is it all created?
There's a long period beforehand. In the case of A Grounding in Numbers, probably 2 or 3 months, in which ideas are battered around. Now, obviously, traditionally, I've kind of been the main writer, but rather less so in this particular setup. In this particular case, I had 2 or 3 pieces that were more or less songs, kind of visible as songs, in that they had kind of a verse structure, some kind of words, not necessarily finished, but some kind of words. So that's one part, and that's, I suppose, the traditional way of preparing for writing. Simultaneously, I'd have lots of bits, riffs, chord sequences, even noises. Hugh, the same kind of thing. Not actual completely song parts, but things, and we'd send each other these, because in the pre-prep stage, this is pretty well between HB and me, including Guy, of course. So we have CDs flying around, files flying around, saying these are the kind of things that might come up for discussion. And I think by the time we eventually pitched up at the studio, we'd each have 2 or 3 CDs with about 20, 30 different ideas. And as I say, these range from things that would be recognised to be songs to simply bits of sonic stuff that might have something added to it. And then, when we pitched up at the studio, we went, all right, we'll do this one first. All right, done that. now let's have a discussion, let's do that one. And so it went on like that until we'd actually finished the time. So there was because we'd had this kind of visualization process of this is the kind of material we'll be working on, without knowing, because it's also very, very open-ended, the kind of stuff that's up for grabs. I don't have any idea what the drum part will be. And obviously, in terms of the practicalities of working as a group, that's in a way the most crucial thing. It's all very well to have your keyboard part sorted out, but it doesn't come alive until the drum part is there, and that is only going to happen when you're actually working together. So yeah, that's kind of the process, really. Abnormal, I think, But then we're working in an abnormal state because in the backing track recording was just a week.
Really?
Yeah, that was a week of recording, incredibly intensive. So we were basically learning, arranging, recording, finishing, pretty well 2 songs a day.
So you almost went back to the approach of when you first went into a recording studio.
Obviously we are from that era. We're from the era of making an album in 12 hours, basically. So, it's not to say that we didn't spend a lot of time in overdubbing and post-production, but the actual, these are the backing tracks. Of course, it's to a certain extent helped perhaps by the fact that we are a trio, and the important thing in getting the backing tracks was the drum parts. Everything else was up to grabs. I think, in fact, we changed very little in terms of the parts that Hugh and I played, although we added to them, obviously. But if there are just 3 of you, then and you're kind of fairly seasoned, you know what you're heading for. You know when it's a correct take, because we're obviously still interested in having a bit of looseness and a bit of fly stuff going on. But we've been doing it for that amount of time that's neither a pressure nor a hindrance.
So when you got together to record the album, you were saying to me earlier that you headed to the West Country.
Yep.
Is that something that's been a traditional Van de Graaff thing over the years?
Very traditional. And it's always been the West Country. Even going back to the 70s, we used to record a lot in Rockfield. We rehearsed in Simmons Yacht, various other places out there. In kind of modern Van de Graaff era, we've done a lot near Holsworthy, which is a place that Guy has a lot of kind of family connections and used to live down there for a long time. In fact, when we first got together, we went to Holsworthy itself and been there a couple of times. This particular studio was, again, just outside Holsworthy, and so when we were looking for somewhere, again, I say we recorded the album in a week. That wasn't an absolute be-all or end-all. When we went in, we said, we'll have a week, we'll see what we end up with. As it happens, because we worked so quickly, we ended up with an entire album, but we had thought maybe we'd go off and do other stuff later. But yeah, we found a place just outside Holsworthy, which is, eminently suitable, very, very excellent engineer, engineer owner, and completely away from it all and ideal to do the work.
Looking at the actual total time of the album, you've got a collection of songs that are short in length, but it's almost it fits because the album is actually coming out as a vinyl edition as well. It actually fits neatly,
yes,
as an LP as well as a CD.
Yeah, very interesting.
Was that something that happened by accident again?
It was. Effectively, it was accidental because obviously it fits as it fits emotionally as well. In terms of Again, we come from the era, I suppose, where side 1 and side 2 are defining concepts, and if side 1 wants to exit with something but not be absolute finite end, and side 1 is a gradual reintroduction. So perhaps it's a natural aspect of the way that we regard the pacing of a CD that it should have the kind of curve that vinyl has. Obviously, we're not in the business of either packing the singles into tracks 1, 2, and 3, or tracks 7, 8, and 9. So we're looking at some kind of narrative, and since we come from that era of vinyl, probably it's as a result of that. It did, as you say, it did fit very, very naturally there.
And yes, it struck me that the side split on the vinyl edition, actually it fits perfectly. It did take me back to that thing where side 1 of an album used to finish with and leave you waiting for side 2.
Exactly, and it's that odd thing about vinyl. For a start, you've got the choice. You've played the one side, you can stop and go entirely somewhere else. the intention, obviously, as the artist, is you want somebody to rush and can't wait to get that disc over and the stylus down onto the groove for the next one.
Yes.
But there is that
Yes.
hiatus, yeah.
And also the interesting thing is you got Hugh Padgham to
Yeah.
mix the album. Could you tell me a bit how Hugh got involved with the project?
Well, first of all, even from this early stage, when we were down recording, we had the feeling that actually it would be beneficial to have at least somebody else, at the very minimum, have somebody else involved in the mixing at a later stage, so that whatever we'd done to the backing tracks in the intervening period, there'd be a fresh set of ears, and that we wouldn't be the ones completely in control. Possibly because I think we were looking for something maybe a little bit more spiky, and as a natural, especially, we are a democratic group. We get along very well. We don't want to argue too much, but maybe if it was just the three of us working, we'd kind of back off rather than go forward. Whereas if somebody else was involved, then different ideas could come through. I've been in touch with Hugh for quite a few years, and kind of had the idea that he would be an ideal person. Happily, very, very, very happily, he agreed to come on and do it, and did an absolutely fantastic job, and precisely in that way of being an outside view. Admittedly, one with a full knowledge of where we'd been, and of where we currently were, and it was a delight, fabulous.
How much did Hugh add to it then? In terms
I think
of
he totally fulfilled the brief of having a external set of eyes, set of ears, and the fundamental. We didn't give him the stuff before the start of the mixing, and the process during a mixing day would be, first of all, with each song that was loaded up, obviously we had some kind of rough mix, so we'd play through the rough mix with whoever was there at the start of the day, sometimes all three of us, sometimes Guy and I, sometimes just myself, play through the mix and just point out a couple of things that need to be pointed out that don't necessarily have to be part of the mix, but you might not notice that there's this little guitar doing this or the organ is doing that there. But just so little pointers, general, scene setting, and then we go away and absolutely leave Hugh entirely to his own devices for the rest of the day, basically. And then came back kind of late afternoon, basically when he thought he'd got something that was pretty well there. And inevitably, at that point, there'd be one or two, comments, or yes, that's great, but this and that, you don't need to have that. You do need to have that, but very, very minor things. Fundamentally, in each case, he did have a vision that was absolutely correct for the piece. I mean, we are, of course, naturally we're talking about mixing, so you can have as many different mixes as there are people on the planet, and you have to have a definitive one. And I think he absolutely got us in each case. Usually, in fact, then there'd be obviously the adjustments. Then we'd have an overnight listening version, depending upon who. This was a process that went on for 2.5-3 weeks, and not all of us were down throughout that period. So, in the way of the modern world, stuff would go up into the cloud, and people could make their listens overnight and have their comments overnight. Last chance for comments first thing in the morning, and then usually the final mix, because also obviously Hugh would have taken it away and listened. Final mix would be usually in the first half hour of the morning, and then start the process again. So he was that independent, genuinely independent, had an independent vision, but in a cooperative way as well. And I have to say, there really weren't any disagreements about anything at any stage.
Would you say then? It struck me listening to it when I first heard the album. I would say that you'd settled in now as being a trio comfortably.
Yes, there's yes and no. I mean, it's I think we're comfortable in kind of knowing our roles, our interdependencies, our reliances. It's still a pretty skittish group, and as a as a trio, it's, I mean, in a way, obviously, the safest versions of the trio, even though a lot of it is complicated music and sometimes difficult to play, difficult to keep hold of, the safest versions of the trio are the piano, organ, drum ones. That's kind of stable, and effectively that would be the known Van der Graaf sound, obviously without saxophone and flute, but that's kind of the known bedrock of Van der Graaf, and that is stable. But I mean, we are interested in pushing ourselves, and there's a lot of stuff on this record that's absolutely not that. I mean, there's even kind of a couple of pieces that are, traditional hard rock trio, guitar, bass, drums, and singing, which is certainly not what people look to Van der Graaf for. So I'm not saying that it's uncomfortable doing that, but it's not safe. And I think as a group, we're not interested in being safe, because that's it's great fun doing the kind of the complicated math contrapuntal stuff, where you only meet up with each other kind of 17 bars down the line. Love doing that, but wouldn't like to do that all of the time. Don't want to keep doing the same thing. This is a fundamentally different record from Trisector. It's not. It has a relationship to it, just as that had a relationship to Present and everything going backwards. But the deal for us is to try and do something different.
So in terms of you're going to go on the road to promote the album, and also presumably
to find out what it's like live, actually.
And to presumably revisit some older material.
Yeah.
So how do you go about performing some of the stuff that when that was written when you were a four-piece as a trio? How does that?
Well, when in 2006 we kind of realised that we were going to be a trio, in our very first meeting, actually, we kind of wrote down what our then set list was that had gone through 2005, and kind of gave not quite Eurovision votes, but don't think we can do that one, but this one we can definitely do, and so on. And so then when in 2006 we didn't even try to rehearse things the first time we met up, but when we finally came to rehearse, we realised that one way or another, with sometimes playing it absolutely straight, sometimes with a little bit of a wink of humour, we could actually play almost everything that we played in 2005. Obviously, there's an element, since we don't deny our history, but happily, and we're in the very fortunate position of being a modern group, and both modern group in terms of what we play, and effectively of who we are. And I say it is a privilege. We're 60-year-old blokes now, to have this opportunity to push, I think, to push boundaries of music, boundaries of what kind of rock groups can do, is fantastic. Along with that, I think we all felt that there was a responsibility to immediately expand upon the repertoire. Yes, we can do that old material, and a lot of it is still very, very interesting to do and very exciting to do. But really, to justify our continued existence, we needed to start having a lot of modern material. Well, we now have 3 albums worth, effectively, so we do have that repertoire, and we also have all of the old repertoire. We also have, and have always had, an absolute abhorrence of the idea of playing the same set every night. I mean, this has never been a great career move, but it goes right the way back to 68, 69. We have never played the same set. Well, we have played the same set on consecutive nights, but actually we reversed the order completely. In fact, that was on the same night somewhere in Switzerland ages ago. So we want to change things around. We'll end up with a list of songs. Obviously, there's the division. The obvious division is: am I just singing? Am I playing guitar? Am I playing piano? Because I don't want to be swapping around, moment by moment. Within that, we'll just decide each night a combination of things. Obviously, we'll have 2, 3, maybe 4 old tunes. We'll obviously, as you say, we are in the business of punting that product, and so we will be promoting the album by playing the new material. And then there's the stuff from Trisector and indeed Present. So it'll be different every night. I also have to say, though, that from the outside point of view, this might seem strange, but once the set list is written, we don't actually have the sentiment of, here's one from 1972, here's one from 1977, here's one from this year. It's simply, this is the tune. Let's bring ourselves with equal nowness to every one of the tunes, disregarding what its original provenance was. So yeah, we will just go for it.
Well, that's always, I suppose, been the blueprint of Van de Graaff Generator, I guess.
It has. I mean, it's not a blueprint that works for many. You can't even say that it's worked that greatly for Van de Graaff as a commercial deal, but it's the principle upon which we've always worked. So,
And you're still here.
yeah.
So, when do you, because obviously you have your solo career alongside Van de Graaff, when do you, is it predominantly down to yourself when you decide it's time to resurrect Van de Graaff Generator or project, or?
It's down to the three of us. We, I mean, obviously, I'm in the odd position of my day job being the same as my night job in this particular case. With Hugh and Guys, it's different. They have their other day jobs. We make ourselves available to each other in advance at defined periods. Obviously, if the work is going to be recording or rehearsal, then it's up to us to motivate ourselves and to get that kind of thing underway. If it's touring, then obviously the agency gets involved and sorts out touring. But we make ourselves available and say, all right, we'll get on with it in that bit. When that's not happening, then I get on with the solo stuff. Again, it must look a bit odd from an external point of view, but it makes perfect sense, and there's never been, as far as I'm aware, any kind of conflict within us about this. Even in a case where, some would say that some of this stuff on the new recording maybe is a bit more, quote, Hammill solo. It's not Hammill solo, actually, because it's been worked on by all of us, and all of us have decided this is Van de Graaff material. But obviously there's a degree of DNA crossover.
I suppose, looking back, I mean, did you ever? It's probably a ridiculous question, but when you started as Van de Graaff Generator in the late '60s, did you ever see that you'd still be recording and touring?
Late '68. Nobody had a career longer than 5 or 6 years. The idea of 10 years, let alone this longevity, absolutely inconceivable. Again, we are in this odd position, and I think this is one of the drives for us, that it is exciting and so on, because we haven't continuously been together. I don't think it would be possible to have the commitment and the freshness if we had, I mean, nothing against bands being together that period of time, but it's not such a special thing. This is a special thing for us to get together and do this really intensive work. It is an opportunity, it is a privilege, and we are all very, very keen to make it work in a way that wouldn't be the case if we just kind of been going along for all of these years. But yeah, back then it was inconceivable. I mean, whether it was Van de Graaff or solo, I reckon I personally would be lucky to do anything for longer than maximum 6 or 7 years, and then I'd have to be doing something else. We were talking earlier saying earlier that at that point, that's when I got my TEAC 4-track, because I thought, well, the record business and music business won't be interested in me. I think I want to be able to make music even if it's not being released. So I'll get the burgeoning start of a home studio at that point. So yeah, that was even my conscious mind was aware of what apparently was going to be a short lifespan in music.
Because the initial sort of when Van de Graaff initially got together and you recorded Aerosol Grey Machine, was that originally destined to be a solo project?
It was. We'd been together we sort of officially formed as a so-called professional unit in '68 and toured and had a lot of the dramas that can beset any group happen to us very, very early. And by the end of '68, early '69, we had broken up for the first time, apparently never to play together again. One of the reasons for breaking up is that we were tied into a recording contract, which meant I was signed up, but the others weren't, and the nature of the contract was one that our manager Stratton Smith wouldn't let the others sign up to it, so weren't able to record, and that was one of the reasons why we broke up. In the absence of Van der Graaf, it made sense. It didn't make any sense not to record, and so Aerosol Grey Machine was originally recorded as a solo album. Then subsequently, with various, soft shoe shuffles and so on, we were going to be released from the contract, provided Aerosol Grey Machine came out as a Van der Graaf record, which it was in part. I mean, there were some tunes on there that were Van der Graaf ones, Octopus particularly. It wasn't the record that Van der Graaf themselves would have made at that point, had we been making a record, but that's the way that it worked out in the end anyway, yeah.
And then you must have been one of the very first artists to actually sign to Charisma Records when it started.
Well, we had been signed to Stratton Smith before, of course, because he was our manager, and I mean, we were. I think we were certainly the first to put out an album. Rare Bird had the first single out, I think, and there's a certain truth, I think, to the fact that Charisma might have been started as a result of Strat's frustration at not being able to sign us to anybody else, and I think, in the grand tradition of things, it was, right, I'll do a label myself then. That's not 100% true, but there was a certain element of that, yeah.
And pretty early on, you discovered, you developed a following, particularly in Italy over that sort of period.
Yeah, we arrived in Italy at a particularly interesting time for Italy and an interesting time for us. And the first time that we went, actually, we most people didn't think that there would be that much of an audience in Italy, and I think our point of view is almost that we would be going for a little bit of a holiday, do some shows, be a little bit relaxed. Which idea lasted until the evening of the first show, when the riot police were outside the hall and the tear gas was going off and so on, and whoops, wrong planet kind of stuff. And we arrived at a time where the Italian audience was ready for us, and we were kind of ready for Italy, insofar as one can be.
It must have been quite a shock.
It was. I mean, it's not to say we'd had degree of success elsewhere before, particularly in Belgium at first, and but the thing is, we were a spiky and nonconformist and troublesome group in a way. So it was success was an interesting concept in our world. That it's not something that, oddly, that we 100% accepted.
You were part of with the sort of foundation of Charisma. There was a sort of a feeling that all the artists signed to Charisma all had a sort of uniqueness about them in some way, and you were part of the Six Bob tour that was an interesting package of
it was Lindisfarne and that was the
Genesis
original one, Lindisfarne, Genesis and us, yes. Very very interesting idea, and obviously playing in places that none of us would have played otherwise, and getting kind of obviously a very, very mixed crowd who were interested in just seeing what was what. Very exciting.
I mean, how did that sort of feel going? I mean, there were sort of a variety of styles going on there on a concert that night.
It took us a little while to get going, because I think the organ blew up for the first couple. I think the organ blew up on the first night, and then the power went on the second night. So it appeared we had the great jinx going on. Lindisfarne were instantly successful, very populist kind of group. I mean, both Lindisfarne and Genesis were excellent groups at the time. Genesis were very, very organised, and we were us. And and in those days, not only would we do a different set night by night, but to be honest, when we were good, we were very, very, very good, and when we were bad, at least 2/3 of the audience would recoil in horror from the room, not even from the show. So it was very interesting, but altogether positive, and very much part of the Charisma outlook, I think, which was that that people should be given their heads to find out what they were about, given a bit of time in order to gather an audience, because again, these were the days where an audience wasn't going to appear overnight by being on one radio show, one TV show, or what have you. It was a question of getting out and playing the Lees Cliff Hall and and going up, driving up to Newcastle and driving back on the same night because hotels didn't exist, all that sort of thing. So that kind of attitude was there, and part of that did involve kind of taking the responsibility. So we had responsibility and kind of good-natured degree of competition among the groups as well.
Because in that short space of time, that sort of first period of Van der Graaf in sort of the early 70s, that bit when you were with Charisma initially, you produced some remarkably complex albums, but were they all recorded in a very short period
3-hour
of time?
sessions, a lot of them. I mean, a lot of Porn Hearts was done. In those days, you didn't kind of book out a studio for weeks and months. It was literally, you got 3 hours, usually in the middle of the night because that was the cheap time. Sometimes after driving back from Newcastle overnight, to be into the studio, and particularly some of the B-sides were recorded after an overnight drive. Not that there were many B-sides, of course, not that there were many singles. But yeah, done in bits, and I think as a result of that, each of us in our different ways would be holding the idea of the record as a mental construct as much as a physical one. You didn't, in those days, you didn't have listening copies. You didn't have to stick up the overnight in the cloud and then download it at your leisure. What you remembered would be what you heard when you left at the end of the 3-hour session. You obviously didn't have the number of tracks available, so you didn't have that many options. And generally, the whole idea of the thing was held together by each of us in our different ways. So I say until the mixing, until the thing was finally done. It's in a way that's something that has been lost with the number of rough mixes of alternate stems of all of this stuff that one can do these days. That idea that it's there. We've got all of these possibly conflicting ideas that won't actually come together until the mix, and then at the mix, that's it, and you just have that one opportunity, and that will be it. And perhaps this fact of Hugh having done mix effectively in exactly that kind of way is another gesture back towards those days where this is the moment that it happens. Whatever might have been the alternatives before, actually, this is it. This is what the record is. And as long as that actually does conform to the various mental constructs that everybody has had, that's it. That's the record. So that's an old school thing that maybe if you hadn't been through it, you couldn't re-find it.
So creating a piece like A Plague of Lighthouse Keepers, which is lengthy, was that created over all these sort of short 3-hour sessions?
Short 3-hour sessions, and honestly, we didn't know what it would sound like until it was all cut together, until all of the crossfades had been done, and so on. Yeah, in principle, yes, but the actual thing was only existed when finally it was cut together. Yeah.
So it was all quite an intense period of working. Would you say that was the reason why you called it a day in 72 for a bit?
We probably have always been a little bit too intense for our own good. Yes. And particularly, I'll put my own hand up there. Yeah, possibly. Because on the other hand, without that intensity, you don't get the work. So I'd rather have intensive work and something that's really strong and really forthright than have maybe a little bit of an easier life and something that's not so forthright.
And as you say, you went off, you embarked on a solo career at that point, and you got the TAC 4-track and did some very sort of early home recording as for your albums there. I mean, you were mentioning that was something you thought that you would do that as a fail-safe sort of measure.
Yeah, part of it was as a fail-safe, and by then I knew I did like making music, and I didn't want to have that denied me by virtue of having to ask somebody for advance or studio time. So the arrival of the 4-track did make that an option. Then once I'd got it appeared to me that that this was a potentially different way of working. So there were kind of creative opportunities as well. And fairly quickly, again, this is absolutely the norm now. I got into the habit of I'd make my 4 tracks, and then they could be overdubbed when I went in to mix or for whatever other process into the big studio. Of course, the big studio, Trident at the time, a lot of people thought I was pretty cracked to be bringing in this 4-track and then transferring it to multi-track and putting on, the then most expensive synths on the planet and so on. But it's kind of a norm now.
So it was one of those sort of situations. Did you find it technically quite a difficult thing to match the things up when you?
Well, I was
you
pretty
actually
incompetent, to be honest. The technical stuff that I had to work with was pretty low grade. I mean, the TIAC was the shining jewel, but my original little disc had those tiny little black plastic knobs. They weren't. Even calling them knobs is a bit extreme, and it was all kind of phonos, and I had one Unisphere mic and what have you, and I was pretty incompetent, as I say. Even though I'd been around studios, so I had an idea of where I was meant to be aiming, but I wasn't very good at it. But on the other hand, it did produce some odd results, and gradually I learned.
You produced a sort of a wide variety of. You visited quite a wide variety of styles during that sort of period as well. Do you put that down to the fact that you did have that home set
Well, I
up
didn't have any. I mean, there was. Again, this is partly as a result of it's the blessing and the curse of charisma at the time, both solo and with Van der Graaf. No restrictions were ever put on us. There were no fences. You are saying you cannot go into that territory. You stay within this territory. So, from the earliest days of being actual proper musician, both I and I think all of us, we've been encouraged to go wherever the muse takes, and it's as a result of that odd things come in. Yeah, odd influences.
Well, looking at an album like Medea's Big Chance, for example, I mean, I think when you look at that retrospectively, you can almost see that as a lot of people do put that album in almost as a proto sort of punk.
Well, yeah, record. And obviously part of that is as a result of various interviews and nods that have been made by various people over the years. There's a degree of truth in it, not, I think, actually to do with punk, but there is the intention, or there was the intention in 2 or 3 of the tunes actually to play with that spirit of I've got an electric guitar, I know 3 chords. I mean, I didn't know that many chords in any case on guitar at that particular time, but I want to play them loud and I want to play them hard and I want to play them like this. That's all that counts. And obviously is kind of at the heart of punk ethos. In my view, that actually connects back to everything that was about being a teenager and wanting to be in a group anyway, going back to the 60s and before, going back to rock and roll, going back to skiffle. I mean, obviously skiffle, they didn't have the level that kind of began to appear around about the time of the Who and the Animals and the Kinks. But that was my original drive. I personally, I didn't come into this whole thing wanting to play in 15/8 with counterpoint going on here and there. I wanted to play E, A, D, and G. That was the thing. And obviously, Nadir is the one record that actually has 2 or 3 things that are like that. And at the same time, also they're kind of a lot of the songs like sort of my slightly warped thinking of what pop music might be like. So yeah, it's a combination of those things.
So at the time the album came out, it was quite a unique approach, and it was almost the antithesis of everything.
I remember there were reviews saying that the release of this record puts into question not only my own creative career, but that of the reformed Van der Graaf Generator. So yeah, that's the way it goes.
Well, you mentioned that you had reformed Van der Graaf around that time as well. So what actually led to Van der Graaf actually coming back?
We had decided to reform by the time of recording Nadir, and in fact Nadir was the first time that the 4 of us had played together since deciding to reform. And actually, I think that fact that we were playing this kind of fairly straight ahead stuff did have a contributory factor to add in when we started playing that 15/8. That we wanted to have some of that same aggression and immediacy. So yeah, the decision had been taken. There was, all felt stuff to do. particularly we were going to be not a self-managed, but Gordian, who became our manager at that time, who had been a friend of mine at university and was my solo manager. So we were actually taking responsibility in theory we were taking responsibility for ourselves, which meant that we felt more comfortable about going forward into whatever future awaited us, because we kind of skirted around the kind of previous breakup. Another aspect on this was that all of us felt that actually things were completely out of our control, and it became impossible for us to carry on without any sense of empowerment or certainty about where we were going at all. So at that point we felt, yes, we could have a measure of control, and that's how it came about.
That period of Van der Graaf's existence, obviously a lot of musical changes did start happening there. The punk thing did come through, and you were one of the few bands that managed to escape the wrath of a lot of the punks. You actually held up as a
personally, individually and collectively, I don't think we had any gripe against it, really. I mean, to be honest, a lot of things had become bloated. A lot of things, from my point of view, one does always need new blood coming in. You can't have new blood as a bunch of 16-year-olds if being in a group is seen to involve having 17 very expensive synthesizers on racks. If that's what being in a group is, then you're not going to get that in your garage. Whereas if it's I've got a beaten up old acoustic that I've stuck a pickup on and I'm amping through a television set, but it makes a bit of a distorted noise, I like it. That's great. That's the new blood, and then things can go on. So that's what had happened, and that's why you got the beaten up old guitarist coming through. So there was no antipathy from our point of view, and oddly again, maybe because of this, what I've touched on, the chaotic nature of Van der Graaf, that we could be bloody awful, but when it was a good night, we were bloody good, better than the kind of just presenting a show. That's got something to do with the punk ethos as well. That the just that chaotic stuff is part of it, and so I think there was a recognition that actually you could get a touch of chaos. Also, particularly by the time '77 came, and at this stage, we were at the very end of the then Van der Graaf story. Hugh had left, David had left, and we were playing once again with Nick Potter on bass, Guy, of course, on drums. I was playing much more guitar, and we had Graham Smith on violin. I mean, that was actually an incredibly aggressive group. I mean, we really could hold our own sonically against anybody. So
I was going to bring that up, actually. I mean, if you listen to the live album Vital, for example, I mean, it's
brutal.
It's pretty full on stuff. Yeah. And you were certainly the equal of anything else that was going on from the punks, I think, with a different thing. So after Vital, the Van der Graaf story finally ended, and you embarked on a solo career of sorts. You were by the sort of early '80s, mid '80s. You'd embarked on being an independent on that independent route as well. Of actually,
yeah. I mean, it's there was never any particularly grand plan going on, but there's been kind of some subsidiary logic, I think, that possibly I've only seen myself later. Originally, I know I, for myself, I'm a difficult artist to promote. Van der Graaf are difficult to promote, partly because of the sort of reluctance to repeat, in a way reluctance to grasp the nettle of fame and what have you, but certainly the reluctance to repeat, which particularly in those days was seen as this is the only way that you're going to do things. Do something, do it again. That's what you owe the audience, which is completely against our ethos. So I knew that I was complicated for any record company to promote. By that stage I'd left Charisma some time past, and eventually I sort of came to the conclusion, I can actually under-promote myself better than anybody else on the planet, so I might as well take on that responsibility as well. So yeah, I started independent, labelled them at that point, which obviously to a certain extent meant, particularly because it was one person labels, does mean that it's not not really an ongoing thing, except when you've got a release coming out, and the release is not going to be happening every month or even every 6 months. In my case, yes, just about every year. But so there was a degree of kind of retraction. But of course, what that retraction brought me was complete artistic freedom, subject to still being able to earn a living.
And that's something you've continued to pursue, total
Yeah.
artistic freedom,
Yeah.
and whatever directions you choose to go in.
Yeah.
So, why was it time to resurrect Van der Graaf in 2005, after so many years as a solo artist?
Well, it sounds trite, but the fact is that we had, I mean, we all stayed friends. We saw each other from time to time, but particularly in the couple of years leading up to discussing a reunion. First of all, a couple of our ex-road crew had died, so we began to see each other at funerals rather than at social events. We did see each other at social events as well, but 2 or 3 of these had happened, and that's the wagging finger of mortality. So, on the one hand, the idea was there on the table. If we were ever to consider doing anything, even exploring doing anything, probably it would be best to consider it sooner rather than later. And then, obviously, I've kind of been the visible one, and for years had to bat away, would you reform with Van der Graaf to do this? Would you do that? Blah, blah, blah. Battering away the Peter Hammill brackets of Van der Graaf Generator on tour posters and so on, and all that still continued. I think at one particular point there were 2 interesting proposals came to my desk about Van der Graaf. So I wasn't going to say yes, but I think I just passed on to the others. This is the kind of thing that occasionally people speak to me about. Maybe we should start discussing. So then, for months, we discussed, actually. We discussed, again, it being the modern world, we discussed with emails between all of us, what our expectations might be, what the horrors could be, what we absolutely didn't want to do, what we might want to do. And all this was entirely private and actually without commitment. Eventually, we got to the point at which we said, all right, well, we will make a commitment, and we will go away to Holsworthy, of course. We will go away for a week, simply to be together, to play together, and see if there is anything to be done. Without anybody, only our immediate families knew about this at all. And the idea was that, well, it would again be a holiday for a week. The worst that could happen would be that, we didn't get on musically or socially or what have you. Nothing lost, but then at least we'd know we could put it to bed and that it wouldn't go on. That was booked for sometime in February, and at the start of the preceding December, I had a heart attack. So obviously this was, once again, the finger knocking on the door and saying, yes, if you are going to do this, probably sooner rather than later is a good idea. I think, from the other's point of view, they were kind of, well, he's had a heart attack. Are we still going to be going ahead with this? But by the time February came around, I was just about in shape to go and do it. And we did it. Had a fantastic time. Didn't play any old Van der Graaf tunes at all. Didn't even address. Nobody even said, should we have a look at an old Van der Graaf tune? Simply played new stuff. And actually recorded present in that week.
Really, that quickly? Yes.
In that week. Because, again, there'd been that similar process of there were things around that people knew about beforehand, saying this is a song, this is almost a song. And so we're kind of semi-prepped. But it was in that week that we recorded it. I didn't know that we'd done it at the time, because then obviously it was taken away and worked on, and obviously half of present is the improvisatory stuff, which had never been revealed before, but just seemed at the appropriate moment. So only then, when that was done, did finally we get in touch with Gail and say, I have a horrible feeling this is Van der Graaf Generator. And so it was, and then we went forward. So it was only then, once we discovered, well, yes, we think we do have something to do, that we went for it. I think, again, the limit of our ambition at that point was, well, yes, we have made this record. We have got this show booked in the festival hall. Very, very scary to do that. I mean, actually, to have to go back and learn the old stuff again was quite hairy. Didn't know we'd do much more beyond that, to be honest. But then, obviously, a couple of shows in Italy, various other tours, and it kind of carried on from there down to the end of 2005.
And so is looking to the future, is it your intention to keep on recording as Van der Graaf?
Well, recording. I mean, the immediate thing is playing live. I mean, yes. You'll have gathered that there's a kind of heavily episodic thing about what's going on at this stage, which I think is tremendously beneficial. I mean, I have touched upon this. I mean, when we're actually working together, the door is shut on everything else. There's no sort of zipping off to check, as everybody does in normal life these days, to take an hour to go and check the emails, to go and do this, to go and do that. When we're working as Van der Graaf, it's incredibly focused, because we know we've only had that week. We only have, the 2 or 3 weeks for touring. We only have, we did a TV show in December, we had 2 days to rehearse, and then the show. And it's, this is fantastic, and it's, I can't stress too highly what a life-enhancing thing it is. Again, a concept some might find difficult associating with Van der Graaf Generator as being a life-enhancing experience, but believe me, it is. And actually, I think, to be honest, the audience who get what we do absolutely don't see us as negative, kind of knuckle-biting miserabilists. I think they see what we do as being life-affirming stuff. That is the case for us, but it is highly episodic. We have absolute, we are only going to do it as long as the three of us are enthusiastic and committed about doing it. But we are so still at the moment. The next thing will be the next touring, which will be in March and April. Don't know when the next thing after that will be. Probably there'll be some shows at some point, I imagine, maybe towards the end of this year. I imagine that the next thing would be more touring in 2012, because there are lots of other places that we want to go to, naturally to promote the record, but probably to do a bit of live playing as well. So there's that. I would say that, I mean, in fact, having said we're a modern group, I mean, it's still a bit abnormal to have made 3 albums between 2004 and 2011. That's not the normal way. So I think we're probably kind of coming round to an accord of maybe doing a record every couple of years, something like that, assuming that there's stuff to be done. I believe there is, to be honest, and I don't know if you can detect any enthusiasm in my attitude towards this project.
And I think, listening to you, you've made a fantastic new record. I think you can hear it in the music, and as far as I'm concerned, and many other people out there, long may it continue.
Yeah, so. I hope so too. And equally, I think, I also think it's a fantastic record, and it's, as with any record, it's not the same as previous ones. I think it will actually surprise a lot of people. So I mean, some Van der Graaf diehards, it might surprise them. Oh no, that isn't Van der Graaf. Believe me, it is the Van der Graaf of 2011, 2012. But equally, it might surprise a number of people who think we're miserabilist prog diehards who couldn't play an uncomplicated riff if they had the paper bag taken off their heads. But believe me, a lot of it is direct and interesting, and a lot of it is really quite wacky and avant-garde.
Well, Peter, it's been lovely talking to you for the last hour.
It's been a great pleasure.
Thanks for talking to us on Cherry Red TV.
Thank you.